Usually when you come to an event, you're told to turn off your cell phones, right? Everyone's told to turn off your cell phones. So everyone take your phone and turn it on. Everybody take your phone and turn it on. Okay, everybody? Now I want everybody to take a photo from a different angle in here. Okay? So we're going to take a photo. I'm going to take one of you guys. All right? Okay, so over the next couple of minutes, I want everybody whose phone is connected to the internet to post this photo on Facebook and on Twitter. And I've already created an event so you can tag it at the Oregon Right to Life Conference. And that way all of your friends know you're here and might look up and say, oh, what's that? And maybe have a chance to look up the website, put a little thing on the thing, said, hey, I'm at the Oregon Right to Life Conference, listen to this nerd speak, check out the website or whatever. So everybody tagged it on Facebook. We just did this recently at a Catholic high school that I spoke at in New York. And because so many students tagged it on Facebook, a local reporter from the newspaper saw it and showed up to the talk at the end of the talk and then did a whole story about the pro-life thing in the newspaper. Awesome. So it's a really good idea. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about social media and how amazing social media is in making pro-life a verb and not a noun, which is the title of my talk here, making pro-life a verb and not a noun. And I'm going to talk about that. So this is actually a really important part of what we're doing. So you're allowed to fiddle with your phones for at least 2 more minutes. And if you don't know how to do it in Facebook, just find one of the young people in the room. They'll help you. So I pride myself in being a 45-year-old guy that's completely tech savvy for Facebook and Pinterest and all of that, Twitter and all that. So you're never too old for that stuff. You're never too old to be a keyboard warrior. Which used to be a bad term, but I think it's a really good term now with where technology is today. But anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and the stories. How many were at my last talk? Just a few minutes ago. Okay, so there'll be some stuff that's the same, but there'll be a lot of new stuff too. So you can sleep a little bit. You can catch up. When they told me I had to get up and have at 6:30 to start setting my table up, I'm like, are you guys nuts? Come on. But no, there are a lot of people that call themselves pro-life. There are a lot of people that label themselves pro-life. A lot of churches label themselves pro-life, but don't do anything about it. And they don't take the word seriously. Unfortunately, for so many people, pro-life is really just a label. It's a political position. It's a noun. It's something to describe them instead of describe what they do, describe their action. And for so many people, I used to think that that just calling yourself pro-life was okay. I used to just call myself pro-life and think that was enough to say I'm pro-life and to cast a vote once every 4 years, But it's unfortunate that that we don't truly grasp what being pro-life is all about, and in so many different ways in the world, I don't think people actually grasp what abortion is and what it does, and that a child inside the womb is actually a human being, actually a full human person, deserving of the same protection of every other human person. And I think that goes in especially in churches, because I truly believe that if the churches in America would act like they say they believe, that abortion would be over. I truly believe that. I'm Catholic. I came to the Catholic Church 2 years ago after being a Protestant for 20-something years. I don't care what denomination you are, to be honest. I just want you to love Christ with everything in your heart and to stand up for Him. For me, the journey of my Christian faith finally brought me to the Catholic Church, and it's something that's made me closer to Christ, so that's important to me. But before that, I was actually going to an Orthodox Presbyterian church. And a couple years ago, I was at home, and I went to a church where the pastor said he was pro-life. The church had supported my ministry financially and donated to that, and the pastor had even gone to some pro-life events. And I considered this a very pro-life church. And in fact, it was one of the few churches where a lot of people, even before I was Catholic, I was 100% against contraception. I mean, my wife and I have 7 children that are living in 2 with the Lord. But you could cheer for that one, absolutely. But in the Presbyterian church, there's actually a lot of Protestants in the Presbyterian church that also believe in having big families and having a quiver full of children. and allowing God to build the house. But it was about a little over 2 years ago. And I was lying in bed one February morning, and I was about to get up, and I heard a loud scream come from down the hallway. And as I ran down the hallway, my wife was standing in the bathroom, and she was kind of buckled over, and she was bleeding. And I looked in the toilet, and there was the body of our 12-week-old child. She had just miscarried our son, 12 weeks. I reached down and I picked him up, and I looked over at my wife and noticed she was still bleeding pretty heavily. And so I wrapped a towel around her, and I rushed her downstairs into the van, and I had the baby, and I got a container, and I put our son in the container. And we had called her mom, and her mom lives just down the road, and rushed over to be with our other children. And I rushed her to the hospital. It would actually be quicker for me to take her to the hospital than to wait for an ambulance and all of that. So I got her in the van, and I drove down the road to the hospital. And we went into the emergency room, and the emergency room doctor came in the room, and there's blood on the walls and on the floor, and he's calling for a specialist. And the specialist comes in, and the nurses had just hooked up her blood pressure and all this stuff, and I'm crying. And the specialist comes in, and he said, "Oh my God, is that her blood pressure?" And my life flashed before my eyes, because I thought at that very moment that I was losing my bride. And I was just holding on to her. And the doctor started to work, and he was able to stop the bleeding and able to stabilize her. And so I was just praying and just thanking God. And I remember he looked over, he says, "Oh, I'll take care of that." And I said, "No, that's my son. He's going to be buried. We're going to have a funeral." He's like, "Okay, it's okay." And they transferred my wife to the maternity ward, actually, so she could have her own room for a couple of days. And they have this special color coding at the maternity ward that if they put the color on the door, everyone knows that that's someone who just lost a child, for sensitivity and such. And I thought, wow, this is so amazing, the way that they're treating us, and thinking that this is amazing. They understand what just happened. And so we called the pastor of my church, and he came to the hospital, and he was talking to me, and I said, "Well, can you start the process for the funeral?" And he's like, "Oh, wow, we've never done that before." So you've never had a funeral for someone who's had a miscarriage? He says, "No." And he's like, "I guess I can look into it." And I didn't hear back from him that day. And so I just started calling myself. I started calling them local funeral homes. And the first one I called, actually, they said, "Oh, well, just so you know, the cemetery is going to give you a free plot. And we're going to take care of all the needs. All you have to do is pay for the coffin and the tombstone. But all the process, everything is free." Wow. And I was like, wow, like this is beautiful what they're doing. And so the next day when my wife went home, we took our son home, and my wife was upstairs in the bed, and we called all of our kids up there. We had 6 at that point. And we sat around and we looked, and I introduced my children to our son. And we had them help us name him. And we named him Benjamin. And I said, everybody's going to say goodbye to Benjamin, and he's going to go to the funeral home where we're going to get ready for his funeral. And it wasn't weird to any of my kids. It wasn't disgusting to them. It was emotional. My oldest daughter was just weeping. And they were all, "Goodbye, Benjamin." They understood that this was their little brother. That's all he was to them, their little brother. He wasn't a fetus. He wasn't just a blob of tissue. It wasn't a pregnancy. He was Benjamin. And so that Sunday, the funeral was going to be on Tuesday. And I went to church on Sunday with a few of my children. My wife was still on bed rest. And I really kind of thank God now that she was on bed rest that day. Because what happened at church, I got there and, there was a few families that instantly came to the back and were just hugging us and asking how she was. And it was really hard at first. And then the pastor gets up and he starts to announce the funeral. He goes, as you guys all know, the Kempers lost a child this week. And they had a miscarriage, and so they're going to have a funeral. And then he stopped, and he paused. I thought maybe he was choking up. And what happened next was just mind-boggling. He started to give a disclaimer. He goes, well, you know what? Hold on. He said, I understand there's other women here that have had miscarriages before, and you guys chose not to have a funeral. You know what? That's fine. It's no big deal. This is just something the Kempers chose to do. It's no big deal. And it took every ounce of self-control for me not to stand up. He had just said about my son's funeral, it's no big deal. Just something they chose to do. Now, I understand that there are women that have not done that, and he could have easily gone to them privately and talked to them and comforted them. But to say, as I'm sitting there with my children, that the funeral of their sibling is no big deal. I kind of confronted him on Monday. I asked him to go to coffee. And I told him how much that hurt me. And he didn't mean it, he said. And so the next day, when the funeral came about, and as people started to show up, my pastor and his wife and one other couple from the church, none of the elders, none of the deacons, nobody else. Every single family from my children's karate class was there. Every single family. And 2 from our church. And we had the funeral and it was beautiful. And we buried Benjamin. And I called the pastor the next day and I called some of the elders. And I said, why? I just remember saying to the elders, why weren't you there? And I said to the pastor, I said, listen, if that had been Kimberly, my 12-year-old, he goes, well, of course we would have been there for her. We didn't know Benjamin. And I said, but you know me. You know my family. If that had been Kimberly, if that had been another funeral for another child that walks around this church every Sunday, you would have been there. And then he said to me these words, but Bryan, it wasn't any other funeral. It was just a miscarriage. Just a miscarriage. For some reason, we still separate the child in the womb from other human beings. Even a pastor who is financially supported pro-life, who preached pro-life sermons, who had me come back from the March for Life every year and give a report at Sunday school, said the words, just a miscarriage, to justify why the church was not at the funeral of our son. For him, pro-life is just a noun. It's not really a verb. And that's the way it is for so many people. For so many people. Like I said, I was the same way. I thought, as long as I wear a pro-life t-shirt once in a while, as long as I had a sticker on my scooter, as long as I voted for the whatever Republican candidate, I'm pro-life. But it didn't go past that. It didn't really go past that. I didn't see the urgency of what was going on in our world. But then I thought to myself, I had been a missionary overseas. I had traveled to third world countries and, painted schools and did work. And I was single back then. And I found out about a pro-life missionary group. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go ahead and join this pro-life missionary group and do 1 year of pro-life work. And then I can move on and say I've done my part. It's funny when you think about it, isn't it? Yeah. That's really what I thought. Because I wanted to be a rock star. Called me a wannabe rock star and he introduced me. I wanted to be a rock star. I was in a rock band. It was a band called As You Wish. I was the lead screamer. I don't think you can really justify calling it singing. And all that, you know. You guys would have loved it. And we were this really hardcore band, but our name was As You Wish, taken from The Princess Bride. So it was kind of an irony there. But I wanted to be a rock star. See, but I had a noble cause because I wanted to go out and reach. I was a former drug dealer, a former Satanist. I had been involved in so many evil things. And when I came to Christ in 1987, I was like, man, I want to go out and reach these kids that were just like me before. And if I could use the music that they listened to preach the gospel of Christ and to share the testimony, then that's what I wanted to do. Because it was a Christian rock band that first made me think about pro-life. This band called The Crucified back in 1987. And back then, to say Christian punk rock, the people thought that was an oxymoron. But this was a group of young people who just loved Jesus. They were taken from the verse Galatians 2:20, I have been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but Christ lives within me. And I remember them, 1 week after I became a Christian, I went to their concert. And they started to sing this song called The Silent Scream. And I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, I guess I'm pro-life. And I remember going back, and I'm still good friends with the band. I talk to them all the time and hang out. And but I remember talking to them, and the drummer's girlfriend back then, now it's his wife, and they have grown kids in college. But she was explaining to me what Galatians 2:20 was and what the song meant and stuff. And so I had this foundation of, I'm kind of pro-life. But I found out about this pro-life mission group, and I thought I could do 1 year of that, and then I can go off and just be in this rock band. So I joined this mission group out in California called Missionaries of the Preborn. They've now developed, and they're called Survivors of the Abortion Holocaust. Have you ever heard of Survivors? That was the precursor to Survivors. It was me and my friend Ruben Obregon, who now actually works with me at Priest for Life. Him and I were the first two there, and we would just love it. We were young. We didn't have any, We went to Operation Rescue events. We'd be thrown in jail every other weekend for praying in front of the abortion clinics, and it didn't matter. We were single. We got to tell people about Jesus in jail. It was great. It was fun. Well, there was this one Sunday, or our Saturday, that we had gone, and what we would do is we would go to, in downtown Los Angeles, there'd be 12 different abortion clinics in a few block radius that all open at different hours. And we would go and we would go to one clinic that we knew was open at 8 and sit there and we'd pray and we'd talk to people. And then once we've counseled as many people as possible, we go to the next clinic that opened at 8:30 and then the next one that opened at 9. We could hop and bop, just go from clinic to clinic. And there was this one clinic, a guy named Dr. Bramer, who's now out of business. He's lost his license. Thank you, Jesus. But he owned several clinics that geared towards illegal immigrants. And in fact, this one clinic that we went to this day there was a guy in the corner. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not kidding you guys. He had this giant pile of papers in his hand. He worked for the abortion clinic. They were coupons. They were flyers with a $40 coupon for an abortion in Spanish. Some lunatic grabbed the whole stack out of his hand and ran away and threw them in the garbage. I don't know who it was. But those coupons ended up in the garbage. Yes. Anyway. Anyway. I went upstairs that day, and we used to do what we called a truth team, which it's so hard, you really can't do anymore with the federal laws and going to prison with the FACE laws. But back then, I would take a girl in, and she would say, can I take a pregnancy test? She didn't say she was pregnant. She didn't lie. She just said, can I take a pregnancy test? And they would take her in the back room, and then I would sit in the lobby, and I would fill every magazine with as much pro-life literature as possible. And she would fill the back room. Now, just to give you an idea of how corrupt the abortion industry is, I used to take this girl, Beth, in. Beth was 13 years old. I was in my 20s. It was very obvious. Very obvious. So if Beth and I walk into an abortion clinic and we act like a couple and say she might be pregnant, what's the first thing someone should do? Call the police. No. Beth was a virgin. Beth had never even kissed a boy in her life. I don't know if she'd ever hugged a boy other than her father or her brothers. This was this innocent, pure little girl. Her parents were good friends of mine. 2 separate times, the abortionist walked out into the lobby while we were there and said, "Hey, come here. You're pregnant." And show us a positive pregnancy test. And said, "If you give us $250, we'll do it today and we won't report you." Okay, Beth was a virgin. So what they would have done is they would have performed a procedure on a virgin. They would have raped her. That would have been tantamount to rape. 2 separate times that happened. I can't imagine how many young women have gone into abortion clinics that are not pregnant and have procedures done on them when they weren't pregnant. So this one time, we went into this Dr. Bramer's clinic. This is early on in the time. Actually, I'm going back now. And I had gone in with this girl, Kathy Bates, who was my girlfriend at the time. And she went in, and there was about 20 girls in the hallway, another 20 in the lobby. I mean, the place filled in after us. All of them illegal immigrants. And I had Spanish literature. Kathy was in the back, and I was filling the literature in the magazines. And Kathy was taking too long. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on? What's going on? I got to find her. I got to get back there. Maybe she got caught." She's back there putting literature under the pillows and near the machine and everywhere. And I walk up to the front, and a door opens. And I see down the hall in this open door, and it was the abortion room. And there, laying on a table, with tears pouring out of her eyes, was a girl about 16 years old. And I watched as the abortionist performed an abortion. I witnessed a child killed in front of my eyes. And a young girl probably traumatized for the rest of her life. And I realized at that very moment, this is not a political issue. This is not something I can just say I'm against. This is not something I could say, "Oh, I've done my part." I was witnessing the murder of an innocent human being. I went home that night and I cried out to God in the shower. The shower is such a great place to pray, people. If you got a good hot water heater, man, you could get some good prayer time in. And I cried out to God, and I heard a voice. Now, I don't know much about different denominations and what they believe about voice. I just heard a voice, and it said, "Bryan, save my children." That's what I heard. And I knew from that moment on that this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. That was 1993. I knew there was no saying, "I've done my part." I knew that there was a war going on. People talk about the war on women. The war on women is abortion. The war on women is telling these beautiful young women that their offspring is nothing more than a blob of tissue, and lying to them and putting them through this traumatic procedure that will hurt them for the rest of their lives. That's the real war on women. I knew at that moment I had to change things. I knew I was never going to be a rock star. I knew that this is what I was going to do. Now I'm going to go backwards in time just a little bit, a couple hours from that night, because I was back at that clinic. And when I saw that thing happen, I'm going to tell you this little story. It's kind of a good ending to how that day started, because when I saw that happen, I ran. Kathy came out, and we ran out, and Ruben, my friend, and some other people were outside, and I lost it. And they're like, "What's going on?" And I said, "Follow me and do what I say." Now understand, okay, I'm from Los Angeles. My whole step family is Hispanic, but I failed Spanish. I actually got a D in Spanish in junior high, so I took Spanish 1 over in high school again, and then I failed. Of course, I was stoned every day, so in school, but I failed Spanish. I could barely, say a couple words in Spanish, but a word popped in my head. And I told my friends, "Follow me and say what I say." So we started running down the hallway, yelling, "La migra, la migra, la migra!" Immigration. Every single woman in that place got up and ran. Every single one. Except the one on the table. It was too late for her. Her child was already dead. But I knew I can no longer treat pro-life as a noun. Pro-life is a verb. It requires action. The Bible tells us that faith without works is dead. It's dead. Pro-life without action is a lie. It's a lie. It means you don't really believe babies are dying. You just believe it's a stance that you have. Oh, it's a plank in the party. I'm pro-life. No. We must be active. How much time do I have? Does anyone know? Oh, 15, 20 minutes. Oh, this one must be longer than the last one. I'm going to talk to you guys about a few different things, a few different ways that you can get involved and be active in pro-life. And it's so exciting to see what's going on right now in the pro-life community. If anyone has seen my t-shirt that I'm wearing, it says, "I am the generation that will abolish abortion." I know that's a very bold statement, but it's something that I believe 100%. I believe that this is the generation that will abolish abortion. I believe that we are at a time now where the tide is turning, where things are going to change. We have just reached the 40th anniversary. And I hate that word anniversary. 40 years now of Roe versus Wade. 40 years. How many people in this room were born after January 22nd of 1973? Raise your hand. You guys are the survivors. You guys are the survivors. This is your generation that has now survived. I went and spoke a few years back at a Walk for Life for Indiana. Every state has their own Walk for Life now. For people that can't afford to make it out to DC for the main March for Life. So a lot of the states have their own. The West Coast has its March for Life. But I was at the Indiana Walk for Life in Indianapolis speaking a few years back. And it was a few years, and I had already started thinking about the fact that we were coming up on the 40 years of Roe versus Wade. And I was in the War Museum where they had the talk. And I was the keynote speaker. And beforehand, I was just kind of walking around looking at some of the propaganda and some of the posters and stuff from World War II. And there was a propaganda poster that really stuck out to me. It was a poster of little children playing on the grass. And there was a shadow that was approaching, and you could see the shadow just coming around the children, but it hadn't quite touched the children yet. It was the shadow of a swastika. And the poster said this. It said, "Do not let this shadow touch our children. Do not let this shadow fall upon our children." And I thought about that. Because this last January marked 40 years that we have allowed the shadow of Roe versus Wade to touch our children. We have allowed our children to live under that shadow for 40 years, where for the first 9 months of their life, they're considered just partially a human being. And I really thought so hard about that. We must not, we cannot allow that to happen for another 40 years. We can't. And the other side knows we're winning. The other side knows we're winning. A few years ago, right before she left NARAL, the head of NARAL, National Abortion Rights Action League, see, they'll always show up at the March for Life, and we'll have, 400,000 people. They'll have 30 people. The other side, and it's usually a bunch of older people. No offense to people that are older, but it's that generation is aging. I just went to Belgium the last few years and marched and spoke at their March for Life, and they had the March for Death the day before. They don't call it that. They like to dress it up with this word choice. But the March for Death, and it was a bunch of older people, who could, and I'm just looking at it going, wow, where are all your young people? Well, the next day they were at the March for Life is where they were. And if you go, I started going to the March for Life back in 1994, and it was about 70% older people. Today, it's about 70% younger people. The head of NARAL got to the March for Life a few years ago, got off the train at Union Station and freaked out. She wrote an article about it. She's like, oh my gosh, where are all these young people coming from? And she realized they're all going to the March for Life. And she did not like that. She did not like that. She does not like the fact that this is the generation that will abolish abortion. Amen? And part of that is because this generation is not treating pro-life like a noun. They're treating it like a verb. And they're taking action. You have young women like Lila Rose, who can't come up through the ranks as this young student standing up and brought Planned Parenthood to their knees and almost defunded them. And we will be successful at doing that. You have young women like Kristen Hawkins, who took a few student groups and turned it into Students for Life of America with like 700 groups around the country. And now, because of that, Students for Life of England just started. I just went and spoke at their inaugural tour around England. You have young people that are saying no more. I am sick and tired of my generation being killed. We are going to stand up and we are going to end this. And we are seeing them use every tool necessary. And the unity now in the pro-life movement is so beautiful. The unity in the pro-life movement is so beautiful. And we saw that last week. If any of you participated in an event that myself and my friend Andy Moore started, Andy and I, Andy Moore is married to Jill Stanek's daughter. So if you follow JillStanek.com, her daughter married Andy Moore. He had brought Jill and I to speak on a speaking tour of New Zealand. And then Jill started talking to him about his daughter. He came over, the next day they fell in love, and now he lives here, which I'm glad because he's a great activist. But you guys know about this trial that's going on in Philadelphia. Yeah. I'll be there Monday, by the way. I'll be in the trial Monday with Father Frank Pavone and Dr. Alveda King and Janet Miranda and I are taking the train Monday morning to be part of this. But as you know, the media was ignoring it. Absolutely ignoring it. You could not find it anywhere in the secular media at all before last week. And so a friend of mine, Mary Powers, who works for Susan B. Anthony List, who was reading some of the stuff from Troy Newman over at Operation Rescue, calls me over at Stand True and Priest for Life and says, Bryan, you're really good at social media. Why don't you see what you could do to get people talking about the Gosnell trial? And so then I call my friend Andy, who works for Abortion Wiki. You see this thing? All these different organizations working together? And I called my friend Andy at Wednesday night at midnight. And I said, Andy, let's create a hashtag Gosnell and ask people to tweet about who is Gosnell and see if we can start tweeting some news people and stuff. And I said, let's call it Tweet Fest. He's like, cool, I'll start a Facebook page. So Wednesday at midnight, Andy creates the Facebook page. We start promoting it. All of a sudden, Thursday, there's a couple of thousand people that have joined the Facebook page, the event. By Friday morning, the tweets had started, and one of the first person to tweet with our hashtag was an actress from the TV show Everybody Loves Raymond, Patricia Heaton, talking about pro-life and talking about Gosnell. Next thing you know, Jeb Bush is tweeting. Marco Rubio is tweeting. All of a sudden, we read a tweet from Anderson Cooper going, hey, I see all these tweets. I'm reading the grand jury. This is disgusting. This is a house of horrors. I'm going to lead my story tonight on Anderson Cooper 360 about Gosnell. And that night he did a 16-minute story exposing Kermit Gosnell to the world on CNN. The Washington Post that day tweeted, I can't believe we haven't covered this already. We're sending a reporter. We'll be in the courtroom tomorrow. The Washington Times starts a story. The New York Times commits a reporter. A prominent pro-choice reporter tweets out and says, you know what? I didn't tweet this. I didn't cover this before and I was wrong. I'm going to cover this story now. What this guy did was disgusting. RH Reality Check, one of the top things, starts tweeting, trying to say, oh, it's pro-lifers' fault that Gosnell did this stuff. Really? It starts to blame it. The Huffington Post, one of the most liberal things out there during the second tweet fest this week, said, yeah, we purposely didn't do it because we didn't want to expose it because he's an abortionist, and admitted it. On that Friday, from a 36-hour period from when I called Andy Moore till that time, and Friday for 12 hours, 600,000 tweets went out using that hashtag. 600,000. Do you know how much money we spent on that event? 0. Do you know what we did? We just used our voices and the tools that are available today. A lot of people say, well, I don't like Facebook, I don't like Twitter. You know what? You can't afford not to like it. You can't afford not to like it, because by those kind of tools, we can reach the world, and who cares what CNN does anymore, because we can show the world the truth through these tools and through social media. Amen? And if there's anybody here who doesn't know how to use Twitter, I'll give you my email address. I'll get on the phone with you and I'll personally walk you through it. Okay? Because I want us out there doing stuff. We need to be active. We need to treat pro-life like a verb and not a noun. And you guys have Oregon Right to Life, look at this great conference they're putting on. This is one of the best state right to life groups there are in the country. Amen? You got all the stuff that they do. They obviously care about the youth. They do a full youth track. They have Stand Up Girl, which is an amazing, there you go, Stand Up Girl, a great thing. And they bring dweebs like me in, okay? So I know I only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to end with this story. I'll be here all day at my booth right out there. I have the t-shirts out there. I have my book, Social Justice Begins in the Womb, and some other stuff from Priest for Life. I'm also the Youth Outreach Director for Priest for Life. I work with Father Frank. But I want to tell this story because I always get people say to me at the end of a talk like this, they say, Bryan, that's really cool that that's what you're called to do. That's just not what I'm called to do. That's not my calling in life. And I ask them, I say, really? Really? That's not what we're called to do? What are the 2 greatest commandments of the Bible? All your heart, your soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Is our neighbor just the guy next door that won't return our hammer? No. And I think that Jesus gave us one of the best parables, the best ways to describe who our neighbor is. And I need a volunteer, a young guy volunteer. You with the glasses on your head, try to be cool, come on. Oh, how about the other one? No, you're cool because you're wearing an Our Lady of Guadalupe shirt. He's just trying to be cool, sitting next to you. All right, what's your name? Abraham, the camera guy, you're not going to like me for this. Come on up here, Abraham. Abraham got beat up by a bunch of Girl Scouts. You know they support Planned Parenthood. So lay down. Abraham, lay down. I need you to lay down. You're in the ditch. You got beat up and you're laying in a ditch, okay? Anybody who went to Sunday school, hopefully right now, understands where I'm going with this one, okay? So first of all, there's this priest, right? The priest was called to do something, so he's walking by and, and oh my gosh, what? Don't smile, you got beat up. Oh, dude, those are some tough Girl Scouts. Now I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but the priest, instead of helping Abraham, yeah, you know what, I'm called to something else, and the priest just goes this way. Then the Levite walks by. Levite looks down and sees Abraham and is like, yeah, but I got to be somewhere else, and he just goes this way. Then came the Samaritan. Now, Father, you got to correct me if I'm wrong here, okay? Is there any version of the Bible, NIV, and King James, New King James, New American Standard, whatever translation there is? Is there any version ever where that parable is told where the Samaritan stops, looks down, and then goes off and prays and says, God, am I called to a ditch ministry? Is that in any version? I don't think so. No. See, what the Good Samaritan realized that in front of him was his neighbor. His neighbor. Even though Samaritans were considered the worst of the worst, they were like the Obama supporters of their time. Okay? You didn't go near a Samaritan, but he reached down and he loved his neighbor as himself. Give Abraham a big hand. Thank you. Thank you. So listen, when you walk out of this door in a few minutes, or whenever you do, if you're staying for the next session, I want you to look to your left, okay? Take this part real seriously. I want you to look to your left because there's a giant ditch outside of this door. And Abraham's not in that ditch right now. In that ditch are 55 million dead children. 55 million. So when you walk by that ditch, I want you to answer one question in your heart. When you leave here today, who are you going to be? Are you going to be the priest? Are you going to be the Levite? Or are you willing to be the Samaritan? Thank you so much, and God bless you.